He stood approximately 6 feet in height. Historical records reveal his entire body bore the marks of violent whipping. His execution came by way of crucifixion. And here's something worth considering. Would anyone truly give their life defending something false? The film depicting Christ's final hours represented far more than just another Hollywood production. This marked the very first occasion in cinema history where someone dared to reconstruct with complete historical accuracy the events that unfolded on that hill outside Jerusalem more than 2 millennia in the past. The ultimate sacrifice Christ made for every single one of us. Yet the production process itself defied every norm and expectation. Before we continue, please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this. Behind the cameras and beyond the lights, something profoundly disturbing began taking shape. Encounters with forces beyond explanation, eerie manifestations, dramatic spiritual transformations, and circumstances that seemed to defy the laws of probability itself. Those who showed up each day to work on that film location soon came to an unsettling realization. This wasn't merely a cinematic project about the life of Jesus. What they were experiencing was something that transcended the boundaries of ordinary filmmaking. A supernatural journey that was fundamentally altering the course of everyone's existence who came into contact with it. Have you ever stopped to calculate the mathematical probability of this happening? On an ordinary film production, a bolt from the heavens would find its target in the principal performer, and then strike that exact same individual a second time, in the precise identical location. And beyond that single incident, throughout the entire filming period, not just one, but a total of 10 separate accidents would take place. The circumstances surrounding the creation of the Passion of the Christ continue to stand as one of the most perplexing enigmas in the entire history of motion pictures. The entertainment establishment wanted nothing to do with this project, yet something that seemed utterly impossible came to pass. A motion picture delivered entirely in ancient Aramaic, Hebrew, and Latin, languages most viewers couldn't understand, featuring no recognizable Hollywood celebrities, receiving zero promotional support, and backed by absolutely no major studio, somehow transformed into a global cultural earthquake. Believers spanning every corner of the planet rallied together in unprecedented unity. This went far beyond watching a movie in a theater. It became a spiritual encounter that reached past the silver screen and touched people in their deepest places. The Passion of the Christ ultimately claimed the title of the highest-earning film ever made in a non-English language throughout the entire span of cinematic history. Yet following its theatrical release, that extraordinary success morphed into something resembling a curse. The powerful forces within the industry and the mainstream media machinery worked in concert to drag Mel Gibson down into the darkest chapter of his entire life. Stay with us through to the final moments, because this story is far from finished. 2 full decades have now passed, and the filmmaker who stood against everything Hollywood represented is making his return. And he's coming back with a solemn commitment to unveil the mystery of what transpired in those hours between the cross and the breaking of dawn. The continuation of the story, the resurrection of Christ. As the 1990s were drawing to a close, Mel Gibson appeared to possess everything a man could desire. He'd become the fearless warrior of Braveheart, the ideal representation of an industry that viewed him as beyond reproach or criticism. But away from the public eye and behind the carefully constructed facade, his personal existence was crumbling into pieces. His marriage was disintegrating before his eyes, and alcohol had taken control of his life with an iron grip. In conversations with journalists that came years later, he openly acknowledged that emptiness had consumed him, that he'd lost all sense of direction and purpose in his life. He went so far as to reveal something even more troubling. He admitted he no longer wanted to continue living. He watched himself systematically destroying every good thing in his path and everyone who cared about him. Gibson found himself caught in a devastating spiral of public adoration, mixed with private guilt and self-loathing. But right in the middle of that suffocating darkness, something occurred that he himself would later characterize as nothing less than divine intervention breaking through into his life. One particular evening, crushed under the unbearable weight of his circumstances, he dropped to his knees in complete brokenness and desperation, and he started praying in a way he hadn't done for more years than he could count. Gibson's upbringing had been steeped in a deeply traditional Catholic household. His father, Hutton Gibson, was a man who held his religious convictions with unwavering strictness. Yet Mel had walked away from all of those teachings many years before. But on that pitch-black night of the soul, he opened up the pages of a Bible, and something dormant deep within his spirit suddenly came back to life. He established a daily practice of reading Scripture. An obsession with the Gospel accounts took hold of him, particularly those chapters that detail the Passion narrative and the crucifixion event. And within those ancient pages, he discovered something that had been missing from his existence for far too long: a sense of genuine purpose. In the years that followed, he made a confession that cuts to the heart of everything. The man speaking here was describing himself when he said he was a terrible person.
Empty.
He acknowledged that his own sins were among the very first things that drove the nails through Christ's hands and feet into that wooden cross. That single statement would become the catalyst for everything that followed. Mel Gibson had lost all interest in simply performing for cameras. What he desperately needed was redemption, and he came to understand that the only path to achieving that redemption was by bringing to the screen the story that had shaken the very foundation of his being. The account of Jesus' ultimate sacrifice on behalf of humanity. No Hollywood embellishments, no softening filters applied, presented exactly as history records it happened, with every bit of its brutal rawness and excruciating pain fully exposed. That's the moment when the concept for the Passion of the Christ took its first breath. This didn't begin its life as some commercial Hollywood venture designed to make money. Instead, it emerged as something intensely personal, a sacred vow, an act of redemption. Gibson threw himself into researching every minute detail connected to the Passion narrative. He studied the 14 stations of the cross, immersed himself in the Gospel accounts, and pored over the mystical visions recorded by the Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, whose supernatural experiences described Christ's final suffering with an intensity that left readers shaken to their core. Emmerich never once set foot outside the borders of Germany, and yet somehow she provided descriptions of geographical locations throughout the Holy Land with such startling precision that archaeological teams would validate her accuracy decades after her death. Gibson's focus had transformed into something that consumed him entirely. He wanted every person sitting in a theater to experience Christ's suffering not as distant observers, but as though they were standing right there, witnessing it unfold with their own eyes. He didn't want audiences to simply watch what happened during the Passion from a comfortable distance. His vision demanded that they would feel it, that it would become real in their own bodies, not as some ancient story disconnected from their lives, but as immediate and present. So he made a decision that defied all conventional wisdom. The dialogue throughout the entire film would be delivered in Aramaic, Hebrew, and Latin, the actual languages that Christ and those around him spoke 2,000 years ago. Not one single word would be spoken in English, and the cast would include absolutely no Hollywood star power whatsoever. He determined there couldn't be any faces that audiences would immediately recognize. The whole concept was absolute insanity by industry standards. No producer operating with any business sense whatsoever would have agreed to finance a film constructed this way. Who in their right mind would put money behind a motion picture presented in languages that had been dead for centuries, containing zero English dialogue, and possessing absolutely no commercial appeal by any Hollywood measurement? When Gibson brought his vision to the executives at the major studios, their response came back swift and completely unified. Absolutely not. Some of them told him with brutal directness that this would become the most catastrophic box office failure in the history of cinema. Gibson's recollection from those days paints a clear picture. Not a single person within the Hollywood establishment was willing to contribute even $1 toward making this project a reality. He recalled their demands clearly. They wanted him to reduce the graphic violence, switch the languages to English, inject some hopeful elements into the ending to make audiences feel better, but yielding to any of those demands would have meant betraying the core of the story. If he compromised on those elements, what remained wouldn't be Christ's authentic story any longer. This became the decisive turning point. Gibson came face to face with a harsh reality. If he truly wanted to tell this story with integrity, he would have to walk this path completely alone. And so he proceeded to make one of the most financially dangerous decisions anyone has ever made in the entire history of filmmaking. He chose to become the sole financial backer of the movie, using his own personal wealth. He liquidated properties he owned, poured in everything he'd accumulated throughout his career, and invested close to $45 million of his own money into bringing The Passion of the Christ to the screen. No studio support behind him, no distribution deal in place, absolutely no safety net or guarantees of any kind. If this movie collapsed at the box office, he would be financially destroyed. But Gibson wasn't pursuing commercial success or critical acclaim. What drove him was the desperate need for redemption. He later made it crystal clear, this wasn't a film he simply wanted to create. This was a film he absolutely had to create, regardless of the cost. That choice separated him from the Hollywood community and left him isolated, but at the same time, it reconnected him with something he'd believed was lost forever: his faith in God. And that solitary step, taken without any support and against every piece of conventional wisdom, wouldn't just transform the direction of his own life. It would fundamentally alter the landscape of religious cinema for all time to come. When Mel Gibson firmly decided he would bring The Passion of the Christ to reality, one particular question haunted his every thought. Who on earth could possibly take on the role of the Son of God? Gibson understood with complete clarity that this role couldn't be approached as just another acting job. This wasn't about learning lines by heart or conjuring up emotions on cue. What this demanded was the complete embodiment of agony, of surrender, of the sacrificial act performed by a being who fundamentally changed the trajectory of human history. Gibson wasn't conducting a search for someone who could act. His search was for someone willing to genuinely suffer, and very few people in Hollywood possessed either the preparation or the willingness to subject themselves to such extraordinary physical demands. Month after month passed as he rejected famous names and well-known actors. He had no interest in recognizable celebrity faces or big names that would pull attention away from the central message. His desire was for audiences to see not a performer playing a part, but to see Jesus himself. And then one particular name surfaced: Jim Caviezel. He was an actor who practiced the Catholic faith, relatively young, reserved in his demeanor, possessing a gaze that was both peaceful and penetrating. His previous work included roles in The Thin Red Line and Angel Eyes, and although his career was showing upward momentum, he hadn't yet become a household name. Gibson extended an invitation for him to come to his home in Malibu. The meeting was scheduled to last just a few minutes, but instead, it stretched on for 3 full hours. Their conversation ranged across topics of faith, the nature of darkness, the meaning of sacrifice, and the enormous weight that history places on certain moments. But Gibson made sure to give him a stark warning before they concluded. If you accept this role, there's a very real possibility you'll never find work in Hollywood again. Silence filled the room for a moment. Then Caviezel offered his response, Every single one of us carries our own cross through life. Our only choices are to shoulder that burden or to be crushed underneath its weight. It was precisely at that moment when something unusual took place. While they were discussing the final details of the role, Jim happened to mention that he'd recently celebrated his 33rd birthday, the traditional age assigned to Christ at the time of his crucifixion. Mel stopped what he was doing and stared directly at him, with an expression that mixed surprise with something approaching awe. Then Jim added one more detail. His initials were J.C. Mel's reaction was immediate. He froze completely in place, then muttered that this was starting to seriously unsettle him. That moment registered as something far more than coincidence in their minds. At the very least, neither of them believed it was merely chance. It seemed as though some greater force was operating behind the scenes of this decision, actively guiding the entire process, pushing both of them toward a story that transcended the making of an ordinary movie. From that point forward, their commitment became absolute and unwavering. Caviezel began his preparation on a spiritual level. He made prayer a part of his routine before stepping into every single scene, attended daily Mass without exception, and devoted hours to meditating deeply on the Gospel passages. But his preparation extended far beyond the spiritual dimension. He recognized that his physical body would need to become a living representation of pain itself. He subjected himself to a training regimen that was absolutely brutal. Yet what he was destined to endure throughout the actual filming would surpass anything his imagination had prepared him for. During the production period of The Passion of the Christ, events began occurring that seemed to defy rational explanation. Something strange and unexplainable hung in the atmosphere surrounding that entire film set. Nobody could articulate precisely what it was, yet everyone present could sense its presence. Sometimes it manifested as an unexpected silence that would descend without warning. At other times, as gusts of wind that would suddenly tear across the location with no apparent cause. Gibson selected the cold terrain of Matera in Italy as the primary shooting location for the film. This particular region isn't recognized for experiencing extreme weather conditions. Yet, throughout the filming period, the climate became inexplicably volatile and unpredictable. Without any warning, mornings that began with clear sunshine would transform into ominously dark skies within just a few minutes. A scene might commence under peaceful, calm conditions, and then completely out of nowhere, winds would arrive with such violent force they would rip tents straight out of the ground and send equipment crashing over. Initially, everyone treated these occurrences as simply challenging weather that had to be worked around. But then, something took place that fundamentally changed everyone's perspective, and what had seemed like weather challenges began to be interpreted as supernatural warnings. While they were in the process of filming a scene depicting the Sermon on the Mount, Jim Caviezel made his way up a hill with his heart fully engaged in the moment. But without any advance notice, the entire weather pattern shifted. The production crew had traveled up into the hillsides of Matera in the southern region of Italy to capture one of the most hope-filled sequences in the entire motion picture, the Sermon on the Mount. The air carried the scent of damp earth, and a mild breeze was moving through. Jim Caviezel was making his preparations to ascend the hill. All around him, technical crew members were running checks on microphones and camera equipment. But in an instant, the weather underwent a complete transformation. Within mere seconds, the air took on a heavy, thick quality, and storm clouds began gathering directly overhead. He would later describe that in that moment, a distinct chill traveled down the length of his spine. He experienced a strong sense that something significant was about to happen. And then, a brilliant white light split the sky open. A lightning bolt struck him directly, the electrical current passing completely through his body from the top of his head down to his feet. The flash of light tore through the heavens and surrounded him entirely. The sound of the blast was absolutely deafening. camera equipment shut down completely. Members of the technical crew began screaming in panic. For one suspended instant, everything seemed to hang frozen in an otherworldly silence. From his position at a distance, Mel Gibson watched the entire scene unfold before his eyes. Jim Caviezel stood there, his entire form completely enveloped in light, sparks visibly dancing through his hair. Against all odds, he had survived. Then the assistant director, Jan Michelini, began running uphill as fast as he could to reach him and provide assistance. But just as he arrived at his side, a second bolt of lightning struck the exact same location. 2 separate strikes hitting the identical spot in less than 60 seconds. Both men were thrown forcefully to the ground by the shock wave that followed. The entire crew stood completely motionless, staring upward at the sky in stunned silence. The mathematical probability of this occurring was essentially 0. Some crew members broke down crying, while others began praying out loud. The medical personnel rushed toward them as quickly as they could move, but remarkably, both men were still alive. They didn't display burns or any visible injuries that could be seen. They were simply disoriented and dazed, with slightly charred clothing and the distinctive smell of ozone permeating the air around them. The paramedics couldn't wrap their minds around what they were seeing. They'd never encountered anyone who survived a direct lightning strike like this before. From that day moving forward, something fundamentally shifted in the atmosphere on the set. Nobody discussed it openly in broad daylight, but everyone spoke about it in hushed whispers when they thought others weren't listening. What possible explanation could account for this being mere coincidence? Some individuals interpreted it as a warning from beyond. Others characterized it as a blessing from above. But one thing united everyone's perspective. After that particular day, the filming process took on a different quality entirely. Every single workday from that point on began with a prayer being spoken. The technicians and crew members, many of whom had never identified as believers before, started crossing themselves before they powered on the cameras. Even the weather patterns themselves seemed to respond directly to the narrative being filmed. When scenes depicting suffering were being captured, the sky would fill with clouds. When moments of forgiveness were being shot, sunlight would break through and return. But the mystery was only in its beginning stages. The time arrived to film the scourging sequence. Gibson wanted this captured with brutal, unflinching realism. His vision demanded that audiences would feel the crushing weight of humanity's sin being born in human flesh. To provide protection for Caviezel, the crew had positioned a thick wooden board securely behind his back. But in the intensity and rawness of filming the scene, the angle of one particular strike went terribly wrong. One of the performers, playing a Roman soldier, brought the whip down with excessive force. The metal tip flew through the air and buried itself directly into Caviezel's exposed back. The cry of pain that erupted from Caviezel, and can be heard in the finished film, wasn't manufactured acting. It was genuine, unfiltered pain. He later described that he couldn't draw breath. The pain overwhelmed him with such intensity that his entire body went into shock. He thought it would be a single occurrence, but it happened a second time. The second blow opened his flesh in a wound that extended over 12 inches in length. That scar remains permanently marked on his body to this very day. And that exact moment was captured on film in the final edit, preserved forever in what became the most emotionally devastating scene in the entire motion picture. But the physical suffering didn't reach its conclusion there. The ultimate test of endurance still lay ahead. The day finally came to film the Way of the Cross sequence. Gibson maintained his insistence on using an authentic cross constructed from solid wood, weighing more than 150 pounds. Caviezel was required to carry this burden under the harsh, scorching sun, to fall under its weight, and to rise again, over and over, and over. During one particular take involving a fall, the plan called for a soldier to hold the wooden beam steady so it wouldn't come crashing down on top of him. But the soldier's timing failed. The cross collapsed and fell with its complete weight directly onto Caviezel's head. He would later say it crushed his head like you'd crush a melon. Some of the blood visible in the shot was theatrical makeup, but some of it was his own genuine blood. But that wasn't the end of it. The falling cross had forced his shoulder completely out of its socket. The pain became unbearable. Crew members rushed forward to assist him, but Caviezel adamantly refused to halt filming. He wanted that fall to be preserved on film exactly as it happened. He wanted the entire world to witness, even if only for a brief moment, what it truly means to fall while carrying the weight of the cross on your body. And Gibson immediately understood. He didn't issue the command to stop the camera. Throughout the minutes that followed, the actor continued moving forward with his shoulder dislocated and out of place. Every movement he made was anchored in real physical experience. Every scream that escaped his lips was completely genuine. His face contorted in agony, the tears streaming down, and the groans that came from deep within him were no longer performance. This was pure, unfiltered pain, being transformed into something resembling prayer. The medical doctors examined him thoroughly once the scene reached its conclusion. They confirmed the shoulder dislocation without any doubt. They strongly recommended he take several days of rest to begin healing, but Caviezel rejected their advice. He returned to the film set the very next day, his arms still visibly swollen, and his shoulder remaining numb. Mel Gibson made a confession years after the fact that the scene was never reshot or redone. What audiences witness in the final version, with the body collapsing and the cross crashing to the ground, is exactly what transpired in that moment. In the final analysis, the dividing line between theatrical performance and actual reality had been completely erased and eliminated. The actor's genuine physical pain became inseparable from the spiritual sacrifice of the character he was bringing to life on screen. The passion was no longer operating as just a movie being made. It had transformed into an act of penance being lived. From that moment moving forward, Jim Caviezel's physical body began breaking down. Filming pressed onward, but the cold became increasingly brutal and merciless. The final crucifixion sequences, the shots capturing Calvary, the image of a body suspended in the space between heaven and earth. All of these were filmed during the winter season. The actor hung from the cross structure for hours at a time, remaining motionless, wearing nothing but a thin tunic, soaked through by rain and battered relentlessly by gusts of frigid wind. The crew made every attempt to keep him warm during the breaks between takes, but their efforts proved futile. His core body temperature started dropping to dangerous levels. Before long, doctors confirmed what had become inevitable: hypothermia. His lips took on a purple color, his hands developed an uncontrollable tremor, and his breathing became increasingly weak. Obviously, filming had to be stopped immediately. But Caviezel refused once again, stating clearly that Christ didn't climb down from the cross, and neither would he. The days that followed became an extreme test of human endurance. The relentless physical strain, combined with the unforgiving cold, soon resulted in double pneumonia. His already weakened body no longer had the capacity to respond. With each passing day, he lost more body weight, and the boundaries between fiction and reality started blurring together in a way that became genuinely terrifying. Makeup artists were working 8 to 10-hour shifts, covering his body with artificial wounds and theatrical blood. But to conserve time, Caviezel began sleeping with all of it still applied to his body. The skin on his face developed cracks from the combination of extreme cold and paint applications, and the prosthetic pieces he was required to wear for days on end caused painful blisters and severe irritation. No stunt doubles were brought in. No special effects were used to simulate his pain. The suffering was absolutely real. The cameras captured every bit of it. This was a form of physical penance being enacted, a performance that had already crossed beyond the boundaries of what cinema typically encompasses. And the question remained hanging in the air around them. Would Mel Gibson issue the order to stop filming? The crew members who were witnessing the actor's torment pleaded with him to bring it to an end. But Gibson responded with a calm, steady voice. If the actor himself can endure it, then so can we. Both men understood exactly what they were engaged in doing. They weren't pursuing spectacle for its own sake. They were pursuing truth. A truth so profound and so deep, it could only be conveyed through genuine sacrifice. During the filming of the crucifixion, Gibson instructed the cameras to continue rolling, even as the actor's body suffered spasms from the extreme cold. Neither man wanted to soften a single element of what was being captured. There were no editing cuts designed to hide the suffering. No alternative camera angles employed to make it less shocking for audiences. Gibson refused to edit out the most difficult parts of what had been filmed. Caviezel, even while battling fever and with his shoulder wrapped in bandages, insisted on completing every single scene in its entirety. Every tear that fell, every spasm caused by the cold, was completely real. Following everything that had already taken place, the lightning strikes, the brutal scourging, the dislocated shoulder, the hypothermia, something shifted fundamentally in the atmosphere permeating the set. It wasn't fear or exhaustion that people were experiencing. It was presence, a profound sensation, as though every stone on the ground, every movement of wind, and every shadow cast was actively watching. Nobody possessed the ability to explain it rationally, but everyone present could feel it unmistakably. During the filming of the most agonizing scenes, silence would descend upon the entire set. Not a single cough,